The marking of a dovetail and bridle frame exercise, part 1 of a 3-part video. Here we have an elevation, plan view and a vertical section view of the exercise. It'll contain 2 bridle joints and 2 dovetail joints. The video will take you through the process of marking out, cutting and chiseling of this framing exercise. To keep the operation safe, all members are always held secure when cutting or chiseling, and always keep both hands behind the cutting edge of the chisel when in use. Leave the chisel in the well of the bench when not in use, and never walk around with the chisel pointing away from you. So our main focus here will be, we will start with the dovetail on where the spotlight is just coming into there now. So that'll be the first joint that we're going to work on, which is viewed here on the elevation part of the view. So here I'm going to position the 2 parts that are coming together as was spotlighted previously. So you'll have, and I'm pointing my 2 fingers there just to show you how they correlate to the drawing I have. And the first thing I'll do is I'll put a face side mark on the drawing on the 2 components I'm working on. And sometimes I label them, especially if there's a lot of components, so as I won't get confused later on, especially if there's a lot of components on some item you might be making. This saves I'm making a mistake. So if you're looking at a B upside down, as it were, then you know you're looking at the piece upside down, and you're less likely to make a mistake with the joint by merely just knowing that. So here we will measure up from the already squared end to the right position for our dovetailed member. So in this case it's 50 millimeters, and I'll use my square then obviously to just square off that line, and returning that then around the edge. So now I'm going to mark the width of the tailed component onto the socket here, as just shown with the pencil there, and I just put in a short nick, and then I'm going to square that then by square, and I'll be transferring those lines around then as shown here. So now I'm going to place the to be tailed component underneath, because I want to mark the shoulder points for the tail on that horizontal member, or the tailed member. So I'm leaving a very slight bit of waste there. You can see I'm feeling with my finger. I'm just leaving a slight bit of waste that I can plane off later on, very slight fraction of a mil. And just I'm going to draw a shoulder line then on one side, just a nick again, a short nick, very short nick, and I'm going to be replacing my square on that, then to square across to the opposite side, the opposite shoulder. And typically I don't draw the line the whole way in case I accidentally cut that whole line by mistake. So you see there, I didn't just shoot straight across the line. So that's to guard against me making a fatal error later on if I get anyways confused, as it were. So as I stated earlier, and I'm now transferring the line around to the back of the tail. And of course, when I go around to the back of the tail, that will be a full line, and that's going to get cut. So here we go, square it around, and here we are now. This is the back of the tail, so this is the back of the component, the opposite side to the face side, and that's going to be completely cut off. So I now have the shoulders of the tail drawn, and I'm now going to just mark the waist. Never skip this step, always mark the waist, and I use just a colored pencil here just for illustrative purposes more than anything else, I suppose, but if it helps you, use a colored pencil. So next we're going to gauge the thickness of the dovetail, and you'll notice here I'm pushing with the thumb of the other hand while I keep the gauge pressed into the timber with the right hand, and can continue the process then you'll have to reverse it in the vise. And again, I'm pushing with the thumb, again, on the left hand in this case, and while I'm keeping the gauge pressed into the timber with the right hand. And try not go past the shoulder line, because when it's a finished product, you don't want to see a gauge line. If that was a piece of furniture or anything you might be making, you wouldn't want to see a gauge line down there. So I'd rather stay shy of that pencil line that you're coming down to there, that shoulder line, rather than go past it. And you need a very good point in your pencil when you're marking in the gauge line. If you see two faint lines instead of one line, that means you don't have an accurate, or you don't have a good point in the pencil, because it's hitting the side walls of the groove, as it were, rather than getting down into the valley of the groove, as it were. So I do have a more of a flattish point rather than a round point on the pencil, I find. And always use get a pencil with a hard lead rather than soft lead, because you won't get a sharp point on a soft leaded pencil, whether you will on the harder leads. So now we start in the opposite corner here, and I cut a track on the end grain with my tenon saw. That's the first step. I just create a track. So now I'm going to continue that cut down the edge of the wood here now, and I'm highlighting that there in a pink line. So I'm just bringing down the line, as I said, and as I'm cutting down that line on the edge, the saw will still exit at the far corner. So I'll still have my saw running through the far corner. That way I can keep the back wall of the joint as straight as possible by keeping the cut as long as possible at the back of the joint. And as always, just be careful that you keep the saw kerf on the waist side that you've marked. Very important. And of course, once I get this almost close to the shoulder line, then I'll just be careful you don't go past the shoulder line, of course. Again, I'd rather you be shy of the shoulder line than go cutting past it. Then you'll have to reverse on the bench, obviously, and then I pretty much start the angle I left off it, and then I'll complete the cut. So as I said, I'm now completing the cut down the other edge of the piece of wood here, and just continue on down, and again just keep the saw kerf on the waist side, and again stop shy of that shoulder line rather than go past it. So next we're going to line up the shoulder line that we're going to cut on the timber jaw of the vise, and then I'm going to score and track it with the saw, with the tenon saw. Now sometimes I score the shoulder with a marking knife and the blade of the square, but this is just another approach I just want you guys to be aware of. So line it up carefully so the line should barely disappear on the behind the line of the jaw, which I painted in green there. And you can see I'm testing there to see have a slight bit of waste just for planing off purposes later on. So then I'm going to take the chisel and keep the chisel on the top of the jaw of the vise, because you know you're using that then as a straight edge, and you see the waggle action I'm using there just to score it. And I'll also press it in on the corner then just to make it a little extra deeper there. So sometimes it's useful to have a square line drawn down on the inside of the jaw of the vise, so as if you are placing timber for this type of exercise anyway, you have a line that you can line up to, so you know you are sitting square to the top of the jaw. So then when you're scoring with your chisel, at least you know you're definitely scoring a square line. So it's a longer line to line up with, so you should be more accurate. So it's probably worth doing that. And then when you do that, sometimes it's better to have it on the opposite jaws, because you can see it easier. You don't have to be looking around the nearer jaw, shall we say. So you could just place the timber in like so and just run a pencil down the inside of the jaw. So again, we're using the jaw We're taking full advantage in any way we can of the timber jaws we have in our vise. That's what I'm doing here right now. I'm just tightening it in there, and I'm going to line it up with the outside line I've already drawn, and I'm just going to run the pencil down then on the inner jaw. So I know then that it's always going to be, that piece of timber in my hand will always be coming up square through the jaw. So here we're going to place the wood in the jaws of the vise, and once it's held in line with that square line there, we'll be able to tighten the vise in, and just we can use our piece of wood here, just as I said before, just to ensure that we have a little bit of waste left on the joint just to plane off. And here we're going to score the shoulder going around the side of the tail now. And again, we're using our chisel just to give it a nice sharp crisp corner on the joint. So next we're going to cut back the shoulder of the tail using the pinch hook as demonstrated here. So I placed this on in the guide groove there, and just to make a start on the cut. And once I made a start, then I can just slide it over to the end of the saw hook. And usually I keep the shoulder line and the end of the hook in line with each other, so it just helps break out any fibers of the wood. So I pulled it a bit closer there now, as you can see. Yeah, that's a bit better. So I just continue on cutting down then until I come up to the line, and that should almost soon come away there now. Yeah. Just checking there, and just to cut it a little bit deeper. Just be careful, don't go over. If you go too deep, you'll only weaken the joint by cutting into the portion that's going to have the tail. So I'd rather you stop a bit shy again and finish it with a chisel if you really had to, if there's maybe a quarter or half a mil left. But do not cut into it, because you will weaken the joint, as I say. Here I'm checking the back wall of the tail just to ensure that there's no high points there. So I'm using the edge of the chisel. So just have a quick check there and make any necessary adjustments if you have to. And then I'm checking the shoulder then as well, as you can see here. So after that then we will place it in the vise as I've alluded to already, and in this case there's a slight bit I need to take off down at the end of the cut that I did earlier. So I'm just keeping it flush there, more or less with the top of the jaws of the vise, and I'm just going to just quickly pare off a little piece left down at the end of the cut there, using the top jaw of the vise as a guide. And then I'm just squaring it off, but don't lean back against the shoulder when you're doing this, because we now have a nice sharp crisp shoulder, but if you lean back against that shoulder line with the chisel, you'll make it a round rather than a sharp shoulder. So that's it there, and just quickly checking it there again, and that's pretty much it in there then. So here we have a right angled triangle creation on the bottom left corner of our pinch hook, and that's set at a 6:1 ratio. Where my thumb is 1 inch, we'll say, and up where I'm tightening it now is 6 inches up. So that's your 6:1 ratio for softwood tail, and for hardwoods that'd be an 8:1 ratio. So I've just now set my bevel to that for marking the sides of the tail. So now we're going to draw the sides of the tail here, and just lining up the blade of the bevel there with the end of the piece, and just draw your line down. and similar approach to the far side. Again, you can just line it up on the far corner there. You can allow a fraction of a mil if you like for a waist, and both distances in at the base of the tail should be the same, so the shoulder lines should look the same distance. And after that, then we shall just mark in the waist. Very important. Don't skip this step. Always mark in the waist. So we're marking it in there in orange. This is going to have to be taken out, cut and chiseled out. So after this, we're going to cut down the shoulders at the base of the tail. In this case, we're using the bench hook. I suppose you could use the bench vise for this if you like. Sometimes, if you're right-handed, this shoulder is not too hard to cut off the bench hook, but the other shoulder, you'll see, it might be handier to put in the vise to cut it, because it's a bit awkward if you're right-handed to hold it. But or you could clamp it to the bench hook, doesn't matter. But it's only a short line to cut anyway, so complete the cutting of the shoulder lines of at the base of your dovetail at any rate. One example of one approach as shown here now. So next we shall line up the side of the tail with the jaw of the vise, as shown here. That will give us a guide now for our chisel. So first of all, the top of the jaw is a straight edge, but it's also the top of the jaw is square to the inside face of that jaw as well. So it's going to be a great guide for the chisel. But before we do any of the paring aspect of it, we're going to do some chopping first, as shown here now. And chop close to the line, but you don't have to go right up to the line. So chop, and then after you've done the chopping, you're going to place the chisel in on the top of the jaw of the vise, as shown here. And you can see the waggle or slice, the slicing action I'm going to use here now to take out the side of the tail. Make any, if you think there's a slight adjustment to readjust, then you can readjust, as I'm doing here right now actually. So make any slight readjustment you have to make, and as I said, place the flat of the chisel on the top edge of your vise, on the timber jaw of your vise, and using a slicing action, then we're going to take out the side of the tail. So, and I'm using that inside corner of the edge of the chisel, the inside, the nearest corner of the chisel, we'll say there to my thumb, where I'm using that like a tooth almost to pare away, to take away the excess. And almost complete here now, and just go straight down there a bit if you have to. Don't lean back in that corner, as I stressed in other situations already before this. So just give any final pare. Now you need a very sharp chisel for this, so you might have to, every now and again in these exercises, you'll need to resharpen your chisel as you're going through the exercises. So just check it like that then with the edge of the chisel. So that's one side taken out, and next we shall reverse it in, and same operation again. Again, lining up with the jaw of the vise and tighten it up there, and again using we'll first chop it with the chisel again, chop the excess, and then we shall be ready then to pare out the excess, then using the top of the jaw, as I've already stated, as a guide. So as I know, I'm chiseling a straight line and I'm chiseling square off the jaw, across the gap of the jaw. So here we go. Chop away. As I say, stay well back from the line. You don't have to go close to the line at all. There's no need to go too close to the line, the side line of the tail, and almost through there now. And then we're ready then for paring. So it's just repeating the other side, of course, the same process. Yeah. And again, here's another example, just a second example again of how I use the chisel. And I keep the chisel flat on the top of the jaw, and I'm using a slicing action, and I'm using that the nearest corner of the chisel to me as kind of like a tooth for there. So again, you can just check with the edge of the chisel and make any necessary adjustments that you might deem necessary if you think there's a little bit of a high spot anywhere. So after that, we're just going to have a quick look all around just to general check and check with the edge of your chisel, see is the shoulder nice and straight, and check the side shoulders as well. And if there's any little bit of paring to be done, then just pop it into your vise as I'm just doing here right now. Just line it up at the top of your jaw, your vise, so it'll be a nice guide to rest your chisel on as you're paring. Now you're chiseling in grain here, so when you're chiseling in grain, you need a really good sharp edge on your chisel. So at this stage, you might want to give it a rub on the diamond stone or oil stone or whatever it is you're using, or water stone. So yeah, here I am chiseling away. Just down at the very base of the tail, there was seemed to be a slight high point, so I'm just taking that out. It's very slight, but just take it out. It's easy to do at this stage now. And then yeah, that's looking good. So next we're going to check the edges of our tail to make sure they're square to the face of the tail. And the reason I want to ensure this is I want the shape of the back of the tail and the shape of the front of the tail to be the same. So that's what I'm checking for here now. Because later on when I'm tracing the tail for the tail socket, even though I'm tracing the back, when the joint goes together, it's the front face and the top edges of the sockets that will be seen. So if they were anyways off square, then it would mean that I might end up with a gap when I put the joint together. But there's less chance of a gap if the front face of the tail and the back face of the tail are square to each other. So here I've clamped the two members together now, and I'm just checking for square. And once I'm happy that they're square, and once I'm happy that there's good shoulder contact all around at the base of the tail, then I'm going to trace on with the pencil, and of course have a good point on your pencil, and I'm going to trace it here right now. So there we go. Trace it right into the tail. So the pencil line is outside the shape of the tail. So later on when I cut this, I should still see that pencil line barely, but it should be still there because when you think about it, it is outside the shape of the tail. So next we're going to square the walls of the socket here while I have it clamped. I'm just going to square it in there, both sides. And I'm only going down a little bit more than, I'm just drawing the pencil line out just over a third the way across the timber because we are only going in 10mm deep. So with this tail. So now we're going to, after having traced the socket on the face of the timber, we're now going to square the socket walls down just a little over a third of the way down the edge of the timber here as we're demonstrating here now. So do both sides. The other side, yeah. And of course the gauge is already set. So whatever depth our tail was, of course, our socket will have to be the same depth. So you won't be changing the gauge. And in both cases, you're gauged from the face side. So if for some reason you happen to have gone down maybe 10.5mm instead of the 10mm specified, well then it won't matter because you'll be 10.5mm down on the socket as well as being 10.5mm down on the tail, because in both cases you gauged from the face side. So that's why it's important to always remember to check for your face side before you gauge, so you know then that you're gauging from the same surface for both components that are being joined together. That's important, don't forget that. So now we're going to place the socketed member into the vise, and here we're going to just position it so the line just barely disappears below the jaw. And in this example, I'm actually going to score it with a chisel. In other times, I might have scored it with a knife and a blade, but here we'll use a chisel. And there we go. Just keep the chisel flat on the jaw, as we did before, and just push it a bit deeper then on the end there, where you're going to be cutting later on. And I'm going to then cut a track, keeping the saw flat on the top of the jaw, just to a track just a mil or two deep, just to get it started. And I'll just take it away then to complete the cut later on. I'll complete the socket wall line to the required depth using your bench hook. And once you've got to the required depth, just place the tail over the first saw cut you've just made, and cover the saw curve, and then check the opposite side to see if you should leave all the line or 2/3 the line or whatever, because you might have been slightly off with that first line, but you can still make a slight adjustment before you cut the second line. So check that second line and ask yourself, will I leave half the line when I'm cutting, or will I leave all the line, or whatever. So now is your chance to rectify any slight shift you might have made with the first saw cut. Well, you can make a very, very slight readjust if you have to. And again, like before, then place it in the vise and use the vise jaw, like as before. Score it with the chisel, and once you score it in, and as before, we'll track it with the saw. Use the tenon saw as the handiest. It's a nice fine cut on it. So use a tenon saw, and as before, just go down the 2 or 3 mil. And then once you do that, of course, take it out then and complete that saw cut down to the required depth. You can use your bench hook again, of course, yeah, or you can put it in the vise if you so wish also. So that's the end of this first part of a 3-part video. The next part will go into the details involved in marking the second dovetail and the socket, and we'll go into more details about chiseling out the socket in that second part as well.